Alright, for the first time ever, 4-episode series right here, but only because there's just so much to get into. And as we were talking about the end of last episode, we were talking about the fallout of All Out 2022. And, I was getting essentially ready for a whole rant, because, Mr. Solis obviously knows. I have a big passion for especially sports journalism, and the big difference for at least me that a lot of people know, especially anyone who's worked with me on the podcast, I am very passionate about doing research ahead of time, getting all the details right, and being very genuine with my work. I never want to. The one thing I hate about a lot of media is that, like I mentioned the last episode towards the end, they take whatever they can, whether it's bits and pieces, to run with a headline of theirs, to run with their narrative, And like I was saying at the end, a lot of people went that way with Hangman's interview, where he was saying, he doesn't. They took that one bit and piece where he was like, "Oh, I don't really take advice from the older generation." They took that and ran with it without looking at the context. And you would expect a guy like CM Punk, who's had a lot of run-ins with media, to be more, what's the word I want to say, diligent with his, research of media interviews and stuff like that, to make sure he's not being fed fake news or a misquote or a quote being taken out of context. But apparently that's where his beef with Hangman stems from, is that, he doesn't take advice from older generations, when it's more of a fact of he just wants to carve a path for himself,
Yeah, and I guess we can, with a little breathing room with this episode, we can catch the audience up on what on earth is happening.
Yeah,
in little AEW, right, in Jacksonville. I think it all started with Hangman. He's in a ring with Punk, and what does he say, Jack?
He brings up a line about workers' rights. And, it later comes out, at least recently, that sort of line was alluding to the fact that Colt Cabana, who used to be a longtime friend of CM Punk, but they had a falling out, very public falling out, It was rumored that, Cabana's contract wasn't going to get renewed, but then it did. But then he was being demoted to the Ring of Honor brand because they didn't want him and CM Punk on the same brand, because that's just kind of how far their beef has grown, where they can't even stand essentially being together.
We haven't heard at all from Colt Cabana, right? Basically since Punk showed up, and we haven't seen him on TV in a long old while. And Jack, to confirm, did Hangman ever evoke Colt's name?
He never brought up his name.
But he said enough, and he alluded to enough to draw the ire of CM Punk, who wrestled a match last night against Jon Moxley, captured the AEW championship. He's a bloody mess. He sits at a table. You say he saw a guy he knows has interacted with Colt Cabana recently, and he goes off. He goes off and says that he asks, what did I ever done to deserve this treatment, right? And he's, goodness gracious, he goes off and he doesn't sound well.
Well, you want to know what makes the manner funny because of what I saw? It's not a guy who's interacted with Colt Cabana recently. This is a guy who years ago did improv with Colt Cabana.
But so again, Jack, can you affirm that at that press conference, and I think we got to stop doing these press conferences, did anyone ask him about Colt Cabana?
No, so I've done my research, much as a lot of people have done. I forget her name, but she's a member of Fightful, who is a company that covers a lot of wrestling content. She released her version of video of the media press conference, and it's from the very beginning, where you see Punk sit down, and you don't hear anyone bring up Colt Cabana. You don't even hear them bring up his real name, Scott Colton. It's Punk who brings it up. And he kind of notices the guy, and that's when he starts kind of pushing, and he starts pushing at the guy, essentially to get him to say Colt Cabana's name, Scott Colton. And when he does, that's when he goes off on it.
He goes off. And he talks about he wants nothing to do with that guy. He doesn't care about that guy. In the last episode, I told you, Jack, that nothing about his tone or his word choice or his behavior implied he doesn't care. He cares, Jack. But he was really hung up about the EVPs who couldn't run a target. And when you say a line like that, Jack, you're not talking reasonably anymore.
Yeah.
I think the men are capable of running a retail store. But he's talking now out of his, he's talking out of his emotions. He's just saying things now to be like extra hurtful. And Tony Khan does absolutely nothing to stop or slow him down.
Yeah. Tony Khan just sat there the entire time.
So at some point in the night, the report is that Kenny Omega, Matt, and Nick Jackson, the EVPs, burst into his dressing room to confront him about his comments.
Yeah. They go.
Punches were thrown, as was a chair.
Yeah, there was. It's kind of confusing because it's obviously turned into, at this point, a he said, she said type of scenario, where it's one person's word against the other and no one knows for sure. But all we know for sure is, as you mentioned, punches were thrown, a chair was thrown, and someone was bit.
Whoa, I didn't hear that part.
Yeah, and I just want to bring this up to add some more lightheartedness to this episode. Someone in the AEW crowd today on Dynamite had a sign, they held it up where it said The Elite, but the corner looked like it had been bitten into.
Oh, look at that. Clever.
Yeah,
Goodness. And, the all summer, since June, when MJF yelled into that camera all them swear words and walked out of AEW cursing Tony Khan's name, the question has been, is this a work, right? Is this a shoot? He went radio silent. We didn't know what was going on. A lot of what happened Sunday night left people wondering in the immediate reaction, is this for real or is it not? Jack, the more we learn about it and the more that's been said and uncovered, on tonight, Tony Khan said that the Trios champions were stripped of the title they won on Sunday. CM Punk is stripped of the heavyweight title he won on Sunday. And that's as much as was said. And you think, Jack, this ain't no work. If it was a work, it would end in a match. Omega and the Young Bucks and Cole Cabana and who else has got beef? And Triple H.
Hangman.
They'd all just be in a gauntlet against CM Punk that he loses, repeatedly.
You want to know how else I know this is a shoot and not a work? Eddie Kingston hasn't spoken on the matter.
Just got done with a suspension and he knows better.
Yeah, he just got done with a suspension,
Hero shared a comment that he laughed. He shared a tweet that he laughed at in May. In May, when Sasha Banks and Naomi had left, right, with their ball and went home, right? And they got the wrestling world talking. CM Punk said, hey, stand up for your fellow wrestlers. They'll stand up with you when you need them. And Miro laughed at that comment in May, and he laughed again this weekend.
Yeah,
They weren't so together this weekend.
Yeah, and, apparently, it's a legal issue now because obviously assault happened. And to truly confirm that this isn't a work, at least for right now, when Tony Khan made that announcement on Dynamite, there was no names mentioned, and there was no mention of suspensions, firings, none of that. He just simply said, hey, our trios titles are vacant, our AEW World Championship is vacant, tournament, or the opening match tonight will be for the trios title. We'll be having a tournament to determine who becomes AEW champion, not interim champion, full-on champion, And that's kind of the signal to a lot of people that this is no longer work in many people's eyes.
Jack, who do you think is suing who? Now we enter speculation station. You like to have your facts and do your research. Now I want to just fan write what's gone down this week. Who do you think is suing who?
Well, apparently, a third party has been hired to investigate the situation, but at the current moment, from what we've heard, at least from one side, it is that CM Punk was the first one to throw hands, so you assume he is likely getting sued first.
Nah, I think Punk's the one with the happy trigger finger on the legal cut, and I think he's suing the EVPs because, Jack, what I heard somebody pontificate on YouTube is that these people are in a position of power. Those EVP titles are vice presidential roles. Imagine in a company a vice president bursting into somebody's office. Imagine approaching an employee. 3 leaders, 1 employee. That's a bad look, Jack.
Yeah, definitely is a bad
this
look.
This could end with those guys losing their EVP status.
Yeah, and it's funny that we brought up, that Hangman, his beef started with Punk over an interview and a line in a promo. But yet, back in February, MJF kind of more strongly alluded to this when he said, Punk is quick to sue when he doesn't get his way.
Oh, that's why I think too this is him for sure. Yeah. Jumping the gun and doing something like this, Jack. I don't know why we have these press conferences, but let me speculate with you, sir. These guys I can picture it, Jack. We're going to watch it on the Dark Side of the Ring episode of AEW 10 years from now. I bet these guys wanted to create this thing that was more real than anything we've ever seen. And they say, we're going to shoot from the hip and we're going to, you know what I mean? We're going to poke. We're going to be real. We're not going to be scripted. We're going to talk off the cuff. And I want you to throw everything you got at me. But I think Punk is a bully. And he can't take it like he can dish it out. And Hangman's out there doing exactly what they all agreed to do. Shoot from the hip, hit him where it hurts, but it hurt too much, Jack. CM Punk thinks, what are you going to do, call me skinny fat? What are you going to do, call me old? No, he went after and struck a real nerve, and now Punk don't want to play no more.
Yeah, and the thing that gets me is that, no one at the time even realized what he was talking about,
No!
And Punk's whole issue with the EVPs was that, they were the ones that went out and told the media about Colt Cabana feeding them these lies and stories instead of, taking it up with him. But, here he is doing the same, talking to the media and stuff. And then a lot of media members have confirmed we've never been in contact with any of the EVPs about this stuff. And it's so funny to me that, this comes out, especially when it comes to the Hangman situation, that Punk has so much issue with Hangman, bringing it up in the promo and his words, he went into business for himself. This comes just a couple weeks after we learned that Eddie Kingston and Sammy Guevara got into it because, apparently things were said that, another talent felt that he didn't like, but he wasn't vocal about it not being brought up like other talent was. Apparently Sammy Guevara has made it clear to talent, hey, this is what you can bring up about me in promos. This is what you can't bring up about me. But when he called Eddie, I think he called Eddie fat or something like that. Eddie didn't like it. And, that caused the whole debacle between those two, which led to Eddie getting suspended,
He pie-faced him, you know what that means, Jack?
Yeah, got him right in the face.
He just does that. He's just get out of here.
Yeah. It's crazy to see, something like this happen after that, where that news broke and everyone was like, okay, well, as much as we all love Eddie, it definitely is, something he needs to kind of take accountability for, and the fact that, he could have handled it better by stating what he wants mentioned and what he doesn't.
Yeah, and you're right. And Punk wants to create this aura of, hey, all you got to do is come up to me and talk to me in my face about something you're upset about. But he certainly made no attempt to do that himself, apparently. Yeah. That part hasn't certainly come up, right?
Yeah.
Golly gee, Jack in his rant, he's going on and on about how the company is the closest it's ever been to $1 million gate off his back or off his efforts. Jack, whose back have we been riding as far as AEW's success goes?
Yeah.
I would venture to say, at least in the last 3 months, that that claim would go to Mr. Jonathan Moxley.
Yeah, I'll go even further. I'll throw out the big claim. John Moxley is the biggest signing this company's ever had, you know?
If not him, Jericho.
Yeah, the two of them, although, I may not have enjoyed some of Jericho's work in his later years here with AEW, him and John Moxley have at least been the most consistent people in this locker room, and John Moxley especially has been the one that's just gone out there and worked with anyone that this company's called him to work with. He's had no issues with people as far as we've heard, He's even let people call him out on certain things, and he's just like, okay, whatever, I allow it, because that's just John Moxley. He takes what he dishes out.
Yep. Jericho ain't got no problems with anybody except maybe the U.S. government, if you were to believe the things about his wife.
Yeah, unlike others, you can assume Jericho has made that clear to the talent not to bring up, because no one's ever brought it up. MJF never brought it up. The Acclaimed have never brought it up. That's the funny part. Sure. Is that's how you know what's been cleared and what hasn't, is if MJF or the Acclaimed bring it up.
I certainly hope after all is said and done, and goodness, the idea that there is now an investigation, the idea that there's now, people suspended from TV, those titles were vacated, Jack. It's going to take a while for this all to blow over, but when it does, I hope Punk is shown to be the paranoid guy he's always been, right? Oh, it was never leaked by anybody, right? I hope we see Colt Cabana back on TV. And goodness, if this is the last we see of CM Punk, goodness, I always think about when people blow up or just sort of, flounder like this after leaving WWE. I always wonder if WWE always knew this was potentially could happen, You think about those guys in control of your narrative. You're like, so were they always crazy? Or folks that like Ryback, right? Like Ryback, somebody who the company let go. You're thinking, God, that was a lot of wasted potential. And then a couple of years later you go, or was it?
Yeah, it's definitely you do have some of those cases where you see that wrestler go on to have success and you're like, okay, yeah, that was maybe just wrong time type of situation, where it just wasn't the right time for some talents. But then other ones, you're just like, and I think the thing that really kind of solidifies thing is just think about how long CM Punk was away for. That if he was away for that long, it kind of makes sense in the sense of why certain companies wouldn't, interact with him. Why WWE, though they always showed interest in willing to bring him back because they cared about the money, they never could agree to something. And then the thing that really kind of irked me is, again, I don't want it to make it seem like I have a bias towards one side, but he calls out the EVPs for essentially never making a wave in a sense, or basically he kind of said they've done nothing for this industry. But my counterpoint is they've done so much that they founded a new company for you to have a place to return to.
Absolutely.
Without AEW, there was no chance CM Punk was ever going to return to wrestling, because he wasn't going to return to no New Japan Pro Wrestling, Impact Wrestling,
Yeah, and something that I think Punk would strongly disagree with, but it's hard to believe on my part, is he doesn't think they would be as big as they are now without him. And I think they absolutely would. Goodness gracious, with Danielson, with Regal, with Adam Cole, you'd be able to use him effectively because you have room for him, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Goodness, you've got people you ain't even using to their fullest potential.
Yeah, and when we got to that point, I remember you mentioned it because we didn't cover Double or Nothing, but you had mentioned, that you weren't as interested in that world title scene because it felt like Hangman was falling flat and you weren't all that interested in what Punk's reign had been so far. And then it's you come to learn Hangman's reign wasn't doing all that well. Apparently the rumor is because CM Punk was in Tony Khan's ear, that he wasn't too keen on the guy.
Yeah. Goodness gracious.
Yeah. And so it's it's just such a messy situation to look at,
Mm-hmm. I'm glad we spent some more time, Jack, unpacking these feelings. Goodness, my dad wouldn't be able to know what to tell me if I shared any of this with him. My brother doesn't care or know any of the players at all, right? You, Jack, you are my rock. My Austin, my Hunter.
Yeah, I truly, I think I said it too, but I was like, this whole fallout just made me so glad that I'm a casual viewer in the sense of I just watch for what's on my screen, because though obviously this is all interesting to speculate about and get into, it's like, it's still like how I mentioned, it left a bitter taste to the wonderful weekend of wrestling that we had, you know, because of all this drama to come out, all these suspensions and all that, and all these different he said, she said stories to come out. It's like all this drama, while it can build interest, for the most part, it also can, you know, deteriorate interest, because it's like, for the most part, you have people like me who aren't all that interested in a lot of the backstage stuff.
Right. I mean, gosh. And, you know, this only would be worth it if it's going to end in this big old blow-off match, which we're never going to get, you know?
Yeah. You know, and it ends up just looking so foolish, because at the end of it, you know, whatever happens, CM Punk ends up having 2 title reigns that never amassed to more than a couple days. Mm-hmm. The trios titles that were finally, you know, made after years of hearing about them, they're finally made. And, you know, what happens? The titles end up getting vacated, even though the team that won them, these titles were made for them. They were built around their story, all for them to just be vacated 2 days afterwards because of this whole situation. And that now goes to waste the whole story that they told with the Dark Order, and it wastes all the time of the different trios that were in that tournament.
Jack, I think those trios titles were being like held hostage until Kenny Omega was healthy, and he came back like at what, 70%, right?
Yeah,
he's still picked up, but they're like, we got to do this. If we weren't waiting for the Elite, if we were okay with the Elite winning them later, the House of Black could have won them a year ago.
Yeah, the House of
Malachi Black would have felt fine.
Yeah, the House of Black could have won them. Death Triangle, who just won tonight, sorry to spoil it for you, sir, they could have won them.
I heard.
People have been talking about the fact that none of the members of the Best Friends have won a title, and yet they were always the ones being projected as maybe they're the first ones to ever win the title, because they've been a mainstay trio since the incision, essentially, of All Elite Wrestling, you know?
Yeah!
We even got to see, you know, teams shine in this tournament, like the United Empire and La Facción Ingobernables, you know? Mm-hmm. We could have seen many international trios show up, you know, like trios from New Japan Pro Wrestling on the Forbidden Door pay-per-view, maybe from AAA or other promotions, you know?
Just another victim of this blowout, this fallout, the drama. Jack, I want to end on a positive note, and I heard something said that was very funny. All of this happening, right? The heavyweight division, shambles. Trios division, shambles. People don't feel good. People hate themselves. MJF came back, and it's not the biggest talking point of the weekend. Who, Jack, out of all of that has been said and done, is coming out smelling like roses? His look back and said in hindsight, I'm the smartest man in the world.
Who?
Cody Rhodes. Who in January was muddied in the TNT title picture, right, with Sammy Guevara, bowed out, stayed low, surprise debut at WrestleMania in Dallas, Texas, and only went on to put on a historic trilogy advice when he fought in that Hell in a Cell with a torn pectoral muscle. He's the man that they say is going to end the Tribal Chief's historic reign. And my man, if he had stuck around AEW long enough, they would have ruined him too.
Yeah, I can only imagine the drama that would have ensued had Cody stayed.
Goodness gracious. He got out. We didn't even know, Jack, what bullet he was dodging.
Yeah, it's so funny because when this initially happened, so many people were like, "It's a work," and all I could think of was, "You all said the same thing about Cody."
Yeah.
And a lot of people were like, "Oh, well, look at the MJF situation." And I'm like, that started off as a shoot and worked its way into a work, but that still started off as a shoot. And this has no signs, like as you keep mentioning, this has no signs of ever turning into a work.
This is a shoot that's working its way into litigation.
Yeah, my goodness, man. And it's just such craziness to see ensue all in 1 year. Like I was gonna mention to you, the Cody stuff happened at the start of the year, and look how far we've come.
Braun Breaker is only a year into his role on TV. Adam Cole and Daniel Bryan didn't debut this time last year, did they?
They did.
Adam Cole and Daniel Bryan haven't even been in that company for a year. CM Punk just crossed a year.
CM Punk speed ran his entire AEW career, basically.
I mean, compare his first promo that night in August when he came out to Sunday. Like two different people.
Yeah, very much. And like the thing that was just kind of most upsetting to me was just kind of like how you brought up the lack of how would you say it? The lack of discipline Tony Khan kind of had in the manner where he just, he allowed him to go off, and it was like, I don't know, what kind of message does that send to your locker room,
It got me thinking, Jack, like imagine if we had a press conference Survivor Series 98, What if we had a press conference WrestleMania 20? What if we had a press conference WrestleMania 9?
Yeah.
It's not a good idea ever.
Yeah, it's not a good idea to do that when after all that, especially with Punk, it was like the blood, the adrenaline, all that, all this anger that is essentially built up and boiled over. Yeah. Such craziness to ensue at the end of such a star-studded weekend.
Goodness gracious.
But, we look forward to Extreme Rules. Who knows? Hopefully things are better. The card's better by the time Full Gear runs around. That maybe we potentially cover it in full. A lot to look forward to. A lot that I'm kind of hopeful to see happen. And I'm just, to end on a positive note, I still love a lot of what AEW does on screen, and I'm just hoping they can hit a reset button to kind of get back on track to what they were at like beforehand. A lot of stories being built, a lot of talent that still get the focus despite not being constantly on TV, finding ways to just, do what they can with that star-studded roster that they have.
I know somebody who can do a lot with that star-studded roster. A gentleman named Hunter Hearst Helmsley. Give him the reins, see what he can do.
Yeah, well, we've already seen what he's doing so far with the roster he's got and all the people he's bringing in to fill any holes that he may still have,
He's bringing in people, Jack, and he's bringing in first names. Yes.
But until then, I guess, sir, we will just have to see when the next time we meet is.
Okay. We'll talk off the air about that possibly being off mic and earlier than you think. But until then, it's been an absolute pleasure hanging out with you this Tuesday evening.
Yes, as always, sir. It's been a great time hanging out. A pleasure to record 4 episodes for the podcast. I know my dad is going to be a very busy man this week with many episodes to listen to.
Hello, Mr. Castillo.
But I want to thank you all for joining us for this episode. As always, I'm your host, Jack, joined by my fellow guest,
Mr. Solis.
Thank you all for joining us for these 4 episodes of covering the different wrestling events that have happened in the fallout. And as always, if it exists, we have an opinion on it. Thank you, and we will catch y'all in the next episode.